John. 1 John, one of those letters in the very end. You can actually go backwards and get there quicker. We did the introduction to 1 John last week. We talked about what we should be looking for in studying the book of 1 John. Those three statements about why he wrote it. The first statement said, I write this so your joy can be complete. And the second statement, he said, I write this so you will not sin. Right? And then the third statement, which is at the very end, which I just happened to forget. I write this to you who believe in the name of the Son of God, so that you will know you have eternal life. So, this week, that sermon got put up on YouTube due to the faithful and untiring efforts of our secretary, Lynn. She does a great job every week getting that up there, getting it edited, sometimes making it shorter so it fits. So if you need to read that, if you need to see that one, you can get online and get that. This morning we're going to look at that first section of 1 John. So turn with me over to 1 John chapter 1. And actually, before you even do that, keep your finger there and turn over to the Gospel of John. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John chapter 1. So I'm going to make an argument here based on the authors being the same. Keep your finger in that one too, because we'll be flipping back and forth, okay? If you need to use a little piece of paper in the back of the pew, you can do that too. Okay. In 1 John chapter 1, verse 1. That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, that we looked at and our hands have touched, this we proclaim concerning the word of life. The author is presupposing some things. He's presupposing that you read something else that he wrote already. Keep your finger there and turn over to John chapter 1. John chapter 1, verse 1. It says, in the beginning. In the beginning. It's a good place to start, isn't it? You like to start in the beginning? You know that that's what the word Genesis means? That very first book in the New Testament. I mean the Old Testament. The beginning. In the beginning. Beginnings. So, John, when he writes his gospel, starts at the beginning. And he makes a reference to that which is from the beginning. He says, in the beginning was the Word. And that's that Greek philosophical term, the logos. The power, the reason. The Word. The Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through Him, all things were made. Without Him, nothing was made that has been made. In Him was life. And that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. Do you see the correlation between the two? The writer of 1 John is assuming that you have read his first work, which would be the Gospel of John. It talks about, in the beginning was this Word, and this Word was life. The things we talked about with the children in the children's home. That Word was that relationship with God. The Word was life, and the life was the light of men. Now, it says here in 1 John, it says, what we have seen with our eyes, we have looked at, and our hands have touched. We proclaim to you concerning the word of life. This author said, I saw him. More than just I saw him. Did you notice it was redundant? What we've seen with our eyes, what we have looked at. And the Greek word here is we have examined. We stared at him. We knew what his face looked like. We could recognize him. We watched him. We watched him walk on water. We saw him. And then he says something very, very important. He said, what our eyes have seen and our hands have touched. The better translation, some of you might have this, is we handled him. We handled him. Now, why is that so important? Well, we'll talk about why it's important to us. Why is it so important to his original audience? Because there's some things going on in Asia Minor. There's some Greek ideas that have invaded the gospel. Greek philosophical ideas. And they have merged in their minds with the message of Jesus. And this Greek philosophical idea goes back to Platonic thought. All right, you hear Platonic thought, you hear Platonic relationships. But one of the aspects of Platonic thought is there's the spiritual realm and there's the physical realm. There are things that you can touch and feel, smell, taste, feel, measure. That's the physical. And then there's the spiritual realm. And these are a reflection. These are a poor reflection of the spiritual realm. There is the ideal and then the poor reflection. And in this idea, in this philosophical idea, the two are worlds apart. The spiritual realm is so far superior and so much more beautiful. And it has no connection whatsoever. Maybe just a pale reflection to the physical world. And therefore, spiritual things, God, can't have anything to do with physical things. And because of that, the story of Jesus caused them some serious problems. What about the story of Jesus? Well, turn back over to John chapter 1. John chapter 1. Let's look in verse 14. It says, the Word, the Logos, became flesh and lived for a while among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. The Word who is with God, the Word who was God, God became physical. Became flesh. Now, you might feel comfortable with that. I hope you do. I hope you do, because we're going to take the Lord's Supper again this morning. It celebrates the body and the blood. But if you hold to this Greek philosophical idea that the spiritual can never become physical, what do you do with Jesus and his ministry? Well, you can do really creative things. You could say, he just looked like he was flesh. He just kind of gave an impression. And there was a group that they taught that, the Docist, the seamist. He seemed like he was flesh. When he walked, he didn't leave footprints. Because he wasn't really flesh. Because God couldn't become flesh. The spiritual could not become physical. And so in order to hold both of those things together, you had to do something very creative with the story of Jesus. Some groups said, oh yeah, he became flesh for just a little while, but he didn't believe. Somebody else took his place and died on the cross, and Jesus watched from another hill while that happened. Okay, now, guys, that's kind of weird, right? But when the gospel writer writes in 1 John, he says, here's the things that give testimony, the water and the blood. Then you'll know why. He's bringing them back to this very, very, very basic, fundamental, joyful, freeing truth. God became flesh and walked for a while among us, and we saw his glory. And not only do we see him, John said, we examined him, we touched him, we handled him. There is no doubt that Jesus was flesh. Now, you're going, score one for John. Hey, have you thought much about the implication of Jesus becoming flesh?